the art of data. This is going to be a fun afternoon talk because it's going to be visually rich with kind of stuff at the forefront of how the art world is interpreting this remarkable phenomenon of big data. And what's interesting is this comes along right at a time when kind of all of us as a society actually care about this stuff. It's now kind of a truism that we've entered the world of big data, even if we're not quite sure what that term means. But we do know that, for example, more data was produced this year than in all of history. We know that telephone metadata can tell our story or more sinisterly give us up because it understands our movements. And that can be a great thing for medical research or a strange thing when you learn the NSA has all of it. We know that advertisers are constantly gathering data and cookieing us and annoying us, and all of this has created a kind of a sense of anxiety and concern. It's at once enormous economic opportunity, but it's kind of a change in the human condition when everything about us can be quantified, measured, made more predictable. And so it becomes a really interesting time for artists to enter, both to help us understand this, because as kind of humans, we're not naturally set up to go look at data, but we're really good at looking at patterns. And so the artists are both helping us literally understand it through something called visualization. But in this panel, we're also going to get into the fact that that artists are coming up with new conceptual ways to look at it, a new form of visual language, because this stuff's at the very beginning. And in many ways, artists are a kind of collective R&D department for us, really pushing the limits of this stuff, because as much as we love them, people like Microsoft or Oracle, aren't really pushing the limits, but it's the art world that's coming up with stuff. Artists have always kind of helped us process a world in transition, and the technological forces that artists use have been disruptive to art itself. You think about when perspective came in during the Renaissance, or how the portable oil tube led to the fact that Impressionists could go outside and paint. And we're at a similar kind of fundamental change today. So we're going to hear from two artists, Paolo Antonelli at the Museum of Modern Art, who's been at the forefront of interpreting this, and Steve Sachs, whose Bitforms gallery has been kind of at the lead of how does this become part of the collectible world? To kind of set up the degree to which big data is so big, many of you know that one of the speakers here talks about his new book, Trillions, that talks about how we're going to have trillions of connected devices. So kind of to paint a comparison, there were 50 million connected devices, 50 million internet users in 1995. Just a couple of years ago, we ran out of internet addresses in the then domain space of the internet, and we went through 4.3 million nodes, 4.3 million connected devices, half things, half people. In a world of a trillion connected devices, maybe 15 years off, that relationship looks like the moon to the Earth to Jupiter. So that's how much stuff will be connected and emitting data. So data really is about the fastest growing thing we have on Earth, and how we deal with it and understand it probably will be affecting us more than anything else. In addition to this panel, we have downstairs an exhibit that considers some of this. So we'll give you a little tour of the exhibit afterwards, and there's a booklet on this. The exhibit's called The Art of Data, and here are some of the works of Luc DuBois downstairs, and here are a couple of Aspen Ideas Festival attendees playing with a couple of the interactive works. To kick us off today, we have Paolo Antonelli from the Museum of Modern Art. She is the curator of design there and also their first head of research and development. And more than anyone else, she has been bringing interactive works into the museum, learning a lot about how do you expose this stuff to the public. And I think, Paolo, you probably know more about how the design language of all of this has been evolving. So I'd love you to kick us off with kind of where we've been, where we're going, and what we're seeing as art meets data.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Yeah, design, exactly. Whenever we get together and Peter goes, art of data, design of data, art of data, design of data. But in truth, the difference is really almost impalpable. And Luke and Jed that are here and that Peter called artists, I also call designers, honorary, but it's really the same. In a way, the art of data can sometimes be self-explanatory or can sometimes be not revealing too much more than new mysteries. And instead, the design of data tends to be about trying to unveil some deeper meaning of the data at disposal. But we'll get to that later. I just wanted to talk about, for a moment, the technology that enables us to design with data and to visualize this data. It's really interesting because every time there's a new technology available, there's a moment of drunkenness. And if you remember in 1984 when the Macintosh 128K was introduced and everybody started using fonts, it was like a mess. I mean, you would experiment with all the fonts in the world in one document, and then desktop publishing, web design, some of the horriblest websites that were using all kind of toasters. I mean, you remember that, So there's always this moment of drunkenness, but it's a moment of exuberant drunkenness. It's all good until we get to a certain moment of sobriety, And people like Peter or like I or Stephen, we do our little thing to set some baselines of decency, of quality, and then the whole group, the whole community starts holding one another to those standards. But there's a moment of drunkenness also with data visualization, and it goes a little bit like this. At this point, it's all about using all of these stereotypes of visualization design, and there are many. Jer can tell you there are so many cliches in visualization design. You can recognize them from afar, and just going nuts with all the stereotypes, with all the colors. These diagrams don't reveal anything besides just, they're very vain in a way. So they're navel-gazing diagrams and visualizations. Well, at least they're cute. There are some that are horrible. Just look at these. It's so hilarious. What do they talk about? I mean, I think it's the sales and production of bananas. And the other one, why does it have to be on a curved wall? So that's what I'm talking about, this moment of drunkenness. And then there's the moment of sobriety that has already started. In a way, right now things are happening at the same time, but more and more we're looking at designers that by their own examples kind of set the basis and set the term of comparison for other designers. And I'm not going to talk about the ones that are here, even though they are high up above at the top of that Olympus, but I'm going to give you the example. For instance, I just showed this work in a previous panel, but I really love Josh On's They Rule from 2004. It's actually an interactive website in which you can see the connections between different corporate boards in the United States and different parts of the government. So it's a way to visualize in a very clean, straightforward way possible conflicts of interest. So 2004, it was quite innovative, but it remains as one of the moments in history of visualization design because of that. So you don't need any kind of special effects to be clear. This is the work of one of the works by Ben Fry, and it's a work that I'm showing to you because I want to talk about the fact that not all visualization design is for the masses. In some cases, visualization design is for smaller niches like, scientists. This visualization that has to do with protein homology, and I will never be able to explain to you what it's about, but it's very accurate, was on the cover of Nature magazine a few years ago. I like the fact that even scientists that usually reject any kind of aesthetics and elegance because they think they're not taken seriously if they do so. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but usually scientists use the worst backgrounds for PowerPoints and the horriblest typefaces, like bright yellow with blue background. And when I asked them once why, they said that it's truly, in order to be taken seriously, you cannot be too elegant. So they're coming around because they're understanding that a certain clarity and elegance can be a way to convey also data visualization in a more effective way. So Ben Fry is one of these sober designers, sober but great, or Giorgia Lupi. You see, this is a beautiful visualization. The elegance is amazing, and she's from Milan, but she lives in New York. And this is a visualization that she presented recently at Jer's conference in Minneapolis, a conference called IO. It's about brain drain from different countries in the world to see how people are like graduates are leaving those countries, the ones that are coming back, the ones that are never coming back. But it's inspired by the exhibition Inventing Abstraction at MOMA. So there's actually a reference to art history. And it's so beautiful, There's nothing dangerous in beauty, art, and aesthetics when it comes to conveying ideas in a very clear way. Moritz Stefaner is another well-known visualization designer. This is quite funny because it's a visualization of different ingredients from muesli, for muesli in different parts of his country. So it doesn't always have to be something super serious, but it's about trying to convey the secrets and the secret life of data in a way that is elegant and at the same time really, really effective. And I think that this is what I'm really seeking when I pick visualizations for the Museum of Modern Art or to show them in events like this. It's elegance and clarity at the same time. And in a way, you can think of these as traditional forms of design. Only data is the material as opposed to using, say, plastics or wood. But we still want something that really adds to our understanding of the world and that is not just an empty exercise. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. You know, I was explaining all of this stuff to my mother the other day, because I was, you know, she brought me up around a world of art, and I was trying to explain to her what art and visualization looks like, and I realized I couldn't just say to my mom, one of the artists here is Luc Dubois, and he downloaded 19 million records, did a Bayesian cluster analysis on dating information, and made a visualization, because I realized you can't say that to your mother. But what I explained to her was that, because she started collecting in the 60s, was just as people like Warhol and Rosenquist in the 60s started to manipulate all the mass consumer imagery of that era, playing with advertising and increasingly fetishized consumer products and the military and weapons, so too artists today are processing and framing all of this pervasive data, and they're doing so kind of with new contexts and playfully, and helping us see and look at it differently. And this is something that Luc does, and I've known Luc for a while, I've been collecting his work for a while, and Luc, you have been playing with kind of the data of our era, things like Craigslist, dating sites, and also a recent war. So please welcome Luc Dubois.
Alrighty, let's see if this works. I'm going to fly you through 4 pieces of mine, 3 of which are shown downstairs. I have a pretty abiding interest in using information to investigate the emotional value of especially words in our society, but also the way in which we increasingly are connected through data. This is a piece that I did for the 2008 Democratic National Convention. It's called Hindsight is Always 2020. It's a set of 43 eye charts, and each eye chart represents a presidency of the United States. It's the words from their State of the Union addresses, the 66 most uniquely common words, or most uniquely used words in each president's administration. This is George Washington's eye chart. You can see his #1 word is gentleman. This is George W. Bush's eye chart. I'll just give you a couple quick pairings here. This is Buchanan versus Lincoln. This is Herbert Hoover versus Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson's #1 word tonight is a result of him being the first president to give the State of the Union address on primetime television. So he began every paragraph with the word tonight. Obviously, his real #1 word would have been Vietnam. Richard Nixon's #1 word is truly. The sequel to this, which was to go from the sacred to the profane, I decided in 2010 to make a critique of the US Census, to look at all of this data that's collected by the government and analyzed for public policy. And so what I thought would be interesting would be to make a census based on how we describe ourselves. So what I did was I joined 21 different online dating sites. As a straight man, a gay man, a straight woman, and a gay woman in every zip code in America, and downloaded every one. So I can tell you how many people in your zip code are funny. This is the funny map. If you look at Nebraska, Nebraska's not particularly funny. This is where all the people are who self-identify as shy. And then what we did was I made maps. And so what I did was I scanned a Rand McNally trucker atlas, traced it by hand, and replaced the names of the cities all throughout the country with the word used more in that city than anywhere else in the country. So we're looking at the map of California. You see details of San Francisco, which has been proxied for gay, and Los Angeles, which has been proxied for acting. These are the left-hand image is the Puget Sound area. If you've ever dated anyone from Seattle, this makes perfect sense. Right? Heartbreak, pretty, books, cigarette. The image on the right is the axis from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, number one word curvy, down to New Orleans, number one word flood. Then we've got Salt Lake City, we've got Denver, and we've got Atlanta, Georgia. And then we've got some details of New York City. This might be a little hard to read, but Midtown Manhattan, I live somewhere between unconditional and midsummer. The image on the right is the Williamsburg Greenpoint area, so you get words like DJ and urbane and glamorous and hipsters. A sort of riff off that is I decided to create a public service piece around the Craigslist misconnection system, where you get to post personals ads after meeting someone that you feel you have a romantic connection with. This system spiders the misconnections feeds for your city and matches people up to see if they might be looking for one another. It uses word analysis to estimate the odds that they're looking for one another, and if those odds exceed 85%, it emails them both and puts them in touch. And last but not least, wow. This is a piece called Hard Data. This is just a little clip of it, but the full version is downstairs. This is a sonification more than a visualization, but what this does is, this was commissioned in 2009, this is a new version of it, to make a musical work that evokes the casualty stream of the Iraq War. And so the way this works is it use the metric of one measure per day of the conflict. And you look at the civilians who've been killed, men, women, children, the soldiers, US and coalition, people who've made refugees, people who've gone missing. And if 50 people get killed that day, the string quartet, it was originally written for, plays 50 notes. If nothing happens, then it's silent. And it tracks the arc of the conflict as a musical structure. The idea being that hard data, facts, can also be hard data, like unbearable. So the idea of creating an emotional attachment to data is something I'm interested in. Thank you.
Luke, hey, one question. As you did that piece,
Yeah.
you actually had to work to get that data, right? I mean, that you had an act of journalism for the year before you presented that data.
Yeah. That took a while.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Kind of ever since the Vietnam War, the U.S. has not been into just giving up body counts. So Luke did a lot of going through open source material to get all that stuff to then go be able to do that work. Our next speaker is Jer Thorpe, who really has been kind of at the leading edge of defining new conceptual ground on how we look at these kinds of things. He was an artist in residence at the New York Times for a year or so, and has started a new company. And he was telling me last night that when he talks to clients, he basically says to them, if you can think of anybody else who can do this work, please don't hire us. And so, Jer, we're thrilled to have you, who's really done more stuff at the forefront of this. So, welcome.
Thanks. I was pleased to see that Luke got the memo that all artists must wear black t-shirts on stage. I founded this company in January called the Office for Creative Research, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that we do, but I want to talk maybe a little bit more broadly about why we're doing the work that we do. I was here once before, a week ago. I flew in to help install a piece downstairs by Paula Crown, and on my way here, we ended up not landing in Denver because of a thunderstorm, and I landed in Colorado Springs instead, and after a 2-hour taxi ride, found myself back at the airport at 1 a.m. and slept on the Denver airport floor, and kind of woke up in the middle of this system. I spend a lot of time traveling, and I think the metaphor of travel is an interesting one. What you're seeing right now is you're seeing a map of every flight in a single day that is landing, coming from the bottom up, and then taking off, coming from the middle up to the top. And what you see is this kind of respiring system. At any given time, there are more than 1 million people in the air. The complexity of the airline traffic system is so much that we really can't comprehend it. And I think that people's experience with data is very much like this. We just can't really understand it, how big it is. And the other thing that I think the airline system lends to us as a thing to think about with our data experience is this lack of control. We have virtually no control as we move through that travel system. And I think we get the same feeling when we're dealing with these large data systems, as has been, I think, very evident over the last couple of weeks. The company that I started really came out of a project that I built at the New York Times with Mark Hansen called Cascade. What Cascade is it's a tool to model how conversation flows through social media, mostly Twitter. So what you're seeing right now is you're seeing this kind of branching conversation structure that all stem from a single tweet about this story called The Island Where People Forgot to Die. In a second, you're going to see this kind of move itself into a three-dimensional space where you'll be able to see the structures of the conversation. And this was a really exciting piece for me because we were able to do something with this data set. We were able to create a new form, and in creating a new form, we were able to create a new way to have a conversation about it. So now we could talk about conversations by saying, oh, that's a bushy conversation, or that's a spiky conversation. These are things that we weren't able to do before. And so these types of tools are really interesting to me, and these types of things that allow us to have a better understanding of data systems by producing new forms and new mediums of engagement. And that's really what we've been focused on. Let me give you another example, which is somewhat different. This is every hotel in the world. It's not all of them, actually, but it's a lot of them, about 700,000 of them. So this is, as a data set, it's interesting, 700,000 hotels, but how do we talk about this? How do we make some sort of human meaning out of it? Well, this graphic is interesting, but I don't think it really gives us any insight into that system. And the system of 500,000 hotels is a real system. It's a lived system. We all experience it all the time. And so I took some insight from this sketch that I found online, Jack Kerouac's sketch of a map of the story on the road. And I thought maybe an interesting way to run through that data, this system of 700,000 hotels, would be to imagine if characters from famous literature were to go and make their travels today, which hotels would they stay in? So we built this piece at the Vancouver Art Gallery, which does exactly that. And so, for example, the first story that we start with every day is Lolita. And we ask, if the characters of Lolita were to travel the route that they travel in the book today, what hotels would they be staying in? How expensive would they be? What would they look like? And so we have this sort of combination of collages of photographs. We have over 2 million photographs of hotels. We have pieces of language from the reviews of those hotels. We have the prices of those hotels. So instead of a data visualization, it's kind of in some ways a data narrative that allows us to unpack that data set in a way which I feel is a lot more human than simply showing diagrams of it. This is a piece that we did together, led by Ben Rubin at the University of Texas in Austin. It's a permanent piece called And That's the Way It Is. To give you an idea of scale, it's 5 stories tall and 140 feet wide. It runs every night from dusk until midnight. And what it does is it plays language from the nightly news. And so I'm just going to show you a brief video of it so that you can get an idea of the experience of the piece. And something has happened with this piece which is really exciting to us. And because it's in a public space and because it comes on at a given time, small groups of students will sit in this courtyard and they will watch the news together. It's like the one promising future for news media is like now people are collectively watching the news again. So this is from about a year ago. There were wildfires in Colorado. So some of the words you're seeing on the building are from that piece of time. I won't play you the rest of the video. It's available on our website, but I'll show you just one more little quick peek at it to give you an idea of what it feels like. This is another section of the piece where we look at historical transcripts from Walter Cronkite, hence the name of the piece, and that's the way it is. And that's the way it is.
Thanks. So our next speaker is Stephen Sachs. Steve runs Bitforms Gallery, and in addition to this being kind of a leading edge of kind of conceptually where art's going, this stuff is becoming collectible, preservable, it's showing up in museums, and then it raises the question, how does this stuff move into something that becomes part of a private collection? What are people collecting, and how is that evolving? So, Steve. Yep. Oh, I'll run your slides for you. So that's
all right.
Hello.
So I started Bitforms Gallery in 2001, and I thought there was a need at the time to have a gallery who really had an expertise in in this area of new media. Of course, new media is a very complicated word because new media is changing per generation and becomes obsolete very quickly. But I also think that's what's interesting, is to study the new media of each generation. But there really wasn't a gallery out there that had an expertise and a comfort level that was connected to the fine art world. So I opened the gallery in Chelsea, which of course now is an incredible place with probably 300 galleries. And I started to work with a range of artists who dealt with this idea of new media. New media could be anything from dealing with very experimental processes, using technology. It could also be very conceptual, tied to these issues that are happening in society. And I can obviously talk about a range of new media. Because we're speaking of data today, I'm just going to focus on artists who are dealing with that. And it's actually a pretty decent amount of my artists are utilizing data in many different ways to create and execute their work. One of them is Raphael Lozano-Hemmer. And you see a piece there on the screen. It's called 33 questions per minute. And this was actually a very early piece that was dealing with this concept of just too much information. How is an individual dealing with all of this information? And basically the piece, if you run the video, creates it based on a set of grammatical rules, and the entire dictionary will just create random sentences based on these rules. And basically, as it says, 33 questions per minute. So you don't quite get to understand it, and then it moves on, and you never see it again. So this is, again, a good example of how an artist was reacting to just an insane amount of information. Part of it is obviously even this concept, one sec, Peter, of automatic poetry in a way. And also what's interesting, because I'm a gallerist, of course, I'm concerned about how these pieces are being collected, preserved, etc. This piece was acquired by the MOMA. And it was probably one of the early pieces that had a computational component. And a little bit later, I'll talk about what that means and how it's preserved, etc. But this was a really important piece for both the gallery and the artist at the time. Next. So another type of data, which is actually pretty popular today, is biometric data, dealing with elements of the body. And this piece, it's called Pulse Index. And basically, it's, well, you'll watch it for 1 second, I'll explain it. So you're asked to actually put your finger in this device, and it takes a high-resolution scan of your fingerprint. And it's really astounding what you see, because you typically aren't obviously seeing your finger at that resolution. And then you become part of, obviously, a selection of hundreds, actually potentially thousands of people who've done this previously. So it becomes this really beautiful grid, but it's also very interesting just to see the textures, the history, the race, the issues of surveillance, of course, is a major kind of concept behind that work. But that kind of data is interesting because the data is coming through the individuals who are approaching the piece. So that data is building constantly, daily, and what happens over time is the last fingerprint of that set would be discarded. So here's another piece called Pulse Room, which also is dealing with biometric data. And every single one of those bulbs that you see flickering is actually connected to someone's heartbeat. So when someone enters the space, there's a sculpture. It kind of looks like a weight machine type of sculpture. You grab it like you would grab your heartbeat, and it actually does grab the rate of your heart. And it'll show you in a second that when you hold on to it, the frequency of your heart will be shown in the bulb above you. And then when you let go, the entire place goes dark. So this is also, again, speaking about data and turning it into these very profound emotional works of art. I mean, this is a really beautiful concept, and really it comes from the data from the individual. And here's another piece from Rafa. This is a new piece that's actually downstairs called Zero Noon. It's brand new, as I said. And it's kind of a new interpretation of a clock, a digital clock. He's basing it on different types of metrics, thousands of different metrics that he's accessing via the internet. You should run the video. Yeah. And at noon each day, it zeroes out, and then the process begins again in terms of accessing these metrics. It's easy to see when you see it downstairs because there's a lot of little details that are quite interesting. So I think I'll talk about the other ones later.
Okay.
There's some other works that I'll go into later on.
Great. So, one of the interesting things that's going on here is we've gone from kind of a very literal view of data to stuff that's increasingly emotional, that's telling stories, and that seems to be an interesting trajectory here. So I'm wondering, like, what are your experiences with this stuff moving audiences or moving collectors, and like, how well are we doing in moving from kind of just ordinal stuff to being able to unpack stories and emotions here?
Sometimes the data, real data without much manipulation besides the one that comes with design can also move people. There's a visualization, the classic visualization of $1 million blocks that I showed previously, that is about showing blocks in cities, especially in Brooklyn, there's more than 300 of them, where the government spends $1 million a year at least to keep some of the inhabitants either in prison or in halfway houses. That can be tremendously moving. So I think that if you have a data set that is powerful and moving in itself and really can show you something about reality that is arresting, and as a designer you're good enough to go from the data to people's hearts with very few obstacles, then it can be super moving.
Yeah, I always think it's, in any conversation about data, it's important to define terms. Data are measurements of something. So there's that active measurement, which is interesting, and then there's that something. So often in the $1 million blocks example, it's like that thing that is the powerful part of it. There are some cases where you can literally just sort of aggregate a data set, and that becomes something that's quite poetic, and then there are other times where you need to do a lot of have to do a lot of work to surface something out of it that's going to, I think, going to be moving to people.
Right. There is the point that the subject of this stuff we're often not neutral about. You weren't neutral about the war. Right. The dating stuff kind of like, was kind of a play on the census. And as I've worked with governments and open data sets, when you, for example, in Oakland, when you do a visualization of crime and the citizens see that from the visualization, the crime of prostitution seems to happen once a month from west to east in San Pablo Avenue. It's a graphic, but it also moves them to realize prostitutes don't work that way. Lazy police do, and they take action.
Right.
How much of the stuff gets wrapped up in changing people's minds, taking action? Because some of your work borders on the political. Are you out to kind of get people to do things, or just to feel stuff differently?
No, I think it's about metaphor. I think that you could read every State of the Union address, and I did. I don't recommend it, but you could, or you could look at some way of distilling that information into something. Those pieces I make are not partisan. They're looking at just this information and displaying them in a way that I think is meaningful. I was interested in the hard data piece, particularly because I have a training as a composer. I started out as a musician, and music is sort of the original art form that uses data, right? You have chords and keys and scales or algorithms and whatever. So musicians are sort of intrinsically comfortable in that space of moving around pieces of information. And so I thought it would be interesting to look at composers who had written music in time of war throughout history and try to evoke their styles in a way that used a contemporary data set as a way to kind of create something that was emotionally resonant. So that one's got maybe a little bit more bias than the others, but a lot of what I think of it is it's portraiture. That's all it is, right? It's, you're making a portrait of something. The census is a portrait of us. It's how we talk about ourselves for the purpose of trying to get somebody to date us. right? Which is a weird rhetoric, right? And it's an interesting rhetoric, and it's a rhetoric that the census, the official census, completely misses. It doesn't look at what we want to do on a Saturday night. It looks at what kind of job we have. But if you're working that job, a lot of times you care more about what you want to do on a Saturday night. So I think it's interesting to represent it that way.
I made the statement earlier that in a way, artists are kind of like our collective R&D department here, because you all have shown...
Largely unpaid.
Huh?
Largely unpaid.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, but we can get into that. So, but like everything you guys have shown so far are like new ways of looking and seeing at stuff, whether it's Rafa, let's turn it into a clock, the examples that you've shown, or it could be music. So Jer, you've worked inside of companies. You were at the New York Times where you're doing R&D and this kind of stuff, and now you work for clients. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship between kind of what the creative world does as they come up with this, and the commercial world, and like when you were at the Times, what kind of problems were they trying to solve?
Well, so I worked at the R&D group for the Times, which is kind of a weird entity. So it's the R&D group for the New York Times company, which is the parent company of everything. So the mandate of the Times R&D group was to try to look into the near future about how media consumption is going to be changed. So media production and consumption is going to change. So it's kind of a strange place. People expect to come to the Times R&D lab and see people doing a lot of stuff involving newspapers and the Times website, but you actually don't really see any of that. You see people building strange objects and using 3D printers, and because it's less about the media that we understand right now, and it's more about what that media might be that we can't see yet. Michael Zimbalist, who runs that group, who's one of my very favorite people, uses this term "looking around corners." It's like just seeing what might be peeking around that corner. I think Paolo, is the R&D group for the R&D for humanities. That's your quote.
Yeah.
And I always think it's
Subscribe.
It's interesting because my company, we use a lot of the things that we learn from media arts on one side, but with data, especially with data, and we talked about Bayesian analysis and all of those things, it's pretty hard to engage with it unless you have the other side as well. I think it's possible, but one of the co-founders of my company, Mark Hansen, is a professor of statistics. He's spent 10 years at Bell Labs, so that we can't right away that part of it as well. I think what we're seeing right now is that you're seeing a new crop of artists who happen to have some pretty sound technical skills that they can balance that criticality that comes from an art practice with.
One of the things I've noticed, and perhaps it's because I'm a geek, but when I go look at these, I become completely interested in, okay, what was the algorithm? How does that piece work? I've gone to your gallery with physicists who will sit there and will just pummel you with questions till she can deconstruct what's going on there. So one of the questions is, and so I want to acknowledge that like to appreciate these things sometimes, getting the beauty of the algorithm or what somebody's doing kind of fleshes it out because it helps you understand it. How does this fit into the world of fine art? Here is this whole new thing, but it's up in museums now, people are collecting it, and yet when you talk to a lot of collectors, it's like, well, we collect modern art, but this computer stuff is new, or this data stuff is new. So how is this stuff taking its place, sliding into the fine art world? Where is it showing up in collections?
Well, it's not that new. I think what's happened since I've had my gallery 12 years, the use of code and computers have become much more accessible, much more affordable, and I think has allowed a much deeper group of artists to come up with real smart conceptual artwork. Because really for me, it's always, it's a struggle because I don't like really talking about actually the algorithm so much and the technology so much, unless that's what the artist wants the viewer to do. But it's really been an incredible change in terms of how people are accepting it. There's just a ubiquitous comfort level. Everyone has these devices, computers, etc.
But who collects it? Is it emerging collectors because they're young and they get new technology? Is it experienced collectors because they're more comfortable getting something new? Is it Koreans because they have a different relationship to technology?
I wish I could pinpoint that audience. I was just in Art Basel in Switzerland, and it was very diverse audience. They were buying very traditional blue chip work, and then they look and they see something that's interesting, and they have a discussion. Of course, again, I don't know if we'll get into it now, but depending on what type of work you buy, whether it's a computational work, a video work, a mechanical installation, there are different issues that collectors need to deal with. But yeah, I mean, the good news is that when I started, there weren't as many artists that were in galleries around the world that do this. I happen to be an expert in it, but now almost every gallery has an artist that has some type of new media component within their practice.
Madam Curator, how do you see this?
Well, I deal with design, not with art, so I don't know who collects video art, but I know that everybody uses visualization design in most cases. And I was thinking before, when you were all talking, there used to be the concept of the wall of sound. You know, I think that sometimes in some of these pieces there's the wall of data. Mm-hmm. Like there's this, like it's the shock and awe of all this data rotating around you, and it doesn't matter whether you understand or not. Something like hits you, and I have to say it's not an answer to your question, but it's just something that I wanted to put out there because of like wall of data. I think really that. People do not necessarily collect visualization design, but they certainly talk about it, and there are websites. There's a little bit of fetishism similar to the font design population. So there are websites that collect visualization design. There's, information is beautiful, the David McCandless one. And every now and then you get totally overwhelmed, because it's too much. So as usual, maybe that's another symptom of drunkenness, the quantity of output. And even in that case, I think there might be some biofeedback coming from the audience at some point saying, take a chill pill, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I have to say that it's like a deep honor to have one of my pieces shown as drunken artwork in your talk. It's been a feather in my hat.
That's good.
How do audiences, so you've introduced this and to audiences and have watched people come through publicly, and of course, as you've pointed out, many people come in for a Picasso and end up in front of one of Jer's works.
Yeah, and audiences respond wonderfully, and there's different ways to show the work. In some cases, do you want me to go on to those two slides very quickly? Because when you show data-based design, in some cases you can show it live. It's easy to show it live. In some other cases, instead, you need to have it. This is the wind map by Fernanda Viegas and Martin Wattenberg, and in this case, we can show it live. It's connected to the National Forecast Center data, so you have kind of a rendering of the wind situation at each moment on the territory of the United States, and people can interact with it. There are some events, like even sand is stored, and so on and so forth. And instead, flight patterns, I wanted to show it to you here. It's Aaron Koblin and others. There's a lot of fascination going on with flights, as you could tell also from what Jer was showing. This has to be shown instead sped up, because if we were showing it live, people wouldn't be able to see really what it means over 24 hours. But by showing it sped up and in a loop and recorded, it gives you really a sense of how the territory of the United States comes alive with the flights that are coming in and out of it and of its airports at all times.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was a really interesting piece, and when we were commissioned by the Denver Art Museum to do a piece involving air traffic, we kind of spent the first 3 weeks trying to understand. Aaron did that piece when he was at UCLA, and it's like I think there are a lot of pieces that there's the simple act of mapping where it's like, let's just take this data set and put it on the screen, and there's just beauty in there already. Right. Like it's like baked into it already. And the wind map is another example of that, I think, where that wind data has been available for a very long time, and it took the genius of Fernanda and Martin to be able to make this thing. And I don't know how Luke feels about these pieces, but for specifically that piece was one of those ones that I just looked at and I was like, why didn't I do that? Because it's so beautiful and it's so perfect, and I don't think I could have executed it nearly as well.
Because it's like a wheat field. It doesn't get any better. It's like a wheat field. You just like feel the wind over you. So
it's interesting to see the dialogue across artists in this whole thing and how folks evolve. So for example, Aaron started with beautiful but literal visualizations and now gets into using crowdsourced, data that people have as he does The Wilderness Down Below or the Johnny Cash Project. So he's evolved to a bit more of a storyteller. And Luke, you were telling me that there's a real dialogue that goes on between designers, between artists here, and of course you often use similar code bases. So kind of how is this evolving and what does the dialogue look like?
Well, I think what's interesting is we all use a remarkably common set of language and metaphor to sort of talk about our practice, and we also use a lot of the same software, right? We use the same code, right? It's one of the things that's really great about computer artists, especially those like Jer and myself who are sort of engaged in what you call the creative coding community, is that there's an incredibly high level of collegiality in terms of sharing ideas. We sort of look at the wind map and we're like, man, why don't we do that? But at the same time, it's not a jealous reaction. It's just a very kind of respectful
a little bit jealous
reaction. But I think what's interesting is we're all evolving these looks, and one of the things that's really great about, or what's really positive about the evolution of this as a medium is that it's evolving a language of visual style that's akin to painting or something like that. You can recognize. I can recognize your work, or I can recognize Aaron's work. And I remember I started out, my first sort of foray into computer art was I was a musician and I was doing visual performance. I was like a VJ. I would do sort of background graphics for music. And when that sort of thing evolved, you eventually got to the point where just as you can recognize a musician's sound, you could recognize a visualist's look. And I remember that was like the tipping point of the maturation of that as a sort of genre or something. And I think we're there now, and it's great.
There's something that's really interesting in there as well. It's like the currency of novelty that I'm really interested in our community. It's, that wind map. It's like now the wind map's done, right?
Move on.
I'm not going to go and do a wind map because people would be like, oh, Fernanda and Martin did a wind map already. It's like, imagine if the first person that painted a flower, everyone was like, oh, that guy's got the flower. We're done with the flower.
You can go on with flights forever. I mean, I think that's irresistible.
But there is a reaction to when we did that piece for the art museum. We got a lot of comments that said well, this is Aaron Kovlin did this 4 years ago, and I was like, what?
It reminds me of the fountain in downtown Aspen. Actually, it's so nice.
Yeah. I mean,
I was going to say because I may want to show the Sebring piece, because one of the things that I look for in artists and how they're dealing with code and potentially data is how do you evolve some of these traditional mediums that you've seen for hundreds of years, like the idea of a collage or a landscape. And that's something also that's very interesting to me, and I think the art world has a sensitivity to that. And they can relate to those type of things, and they can see how this evolution may be interesting for them to collect. Can you show
Just go ahead, switch to that image.
What?
The image is on, so Mr. Control Person, there you go.
There we go.
So this piece is by Sebring Vierstieg. And just imagine if you were just making a paper collage with paint and mixed media. You would just do your thing, you would bring in different elements, you would add to it, you would take away. This is actually doing it in real time. And what it does each morning is select a color. So let's say the dominant color here is purple. And it begins to look on the internet for images that have a reference to purple. And it begins to gather thousands of images. If you can go to the video.
There actually is no video for that one.
There's no video
it's
for that one, sorry.
But we want to go to the audience.
It is downstairs.
It is downstairs.
So you can come and play with all of this downstairs. Yeah. And I want to go to we got just 5 minutes left, so we will invite you all after this down for kind of a tour of all of this and we'll play with it. But let's open it up to audience questions before we're done. So someone probably has a microphone. Excellent. And now we'll go to, here's a woman right here with a question.
One of the most miraculous things about seeing all of these is the facility with data and being able to get these large data sets. Has there ever been a data set that you really had your heart set on or you thought could be really useful that you just could not get? And what would you do with it?
Yeah, right. I tend to not take no for an answer in terms of data sets that I'm looking for. But I'm trying to think of, I don't know, do you have one?
I mean, there's this idea of open data is in some ways not real. Like the vast majority of data is in private hands.
Yep.
So, you know, one of the reasons why we formalized the company the way that we formalized it is so that in doing sort of research work for corporations, we can get access to their data that we wouldn't otherwise get access to. You know, that's behind a kind of firewall. And we've had a lot of success and a lot of failure with that. You know, we work with big companies who've been very happy to let us behind the firewall. You know, having a statistician on staff makes them a little more comfortable that we're going to be able to do what we need to do. But on the other hand, we've had other companies that have just given us a blanket no. Like, you know, you're artists, we're not giving you our data, forget that. So part of what we're trying to understand how to do is to get, you know, how do we get into the firewall data, because that stuff is in some cases the most interesting.
Yep.
I was wondering if the type of art that you guys do is mostly a Western phenomena, or is it also, you know, or is there a Russian or Chinese or Latin American contingent to this? And in
There
countries
absolutely
like
is.
that where they have much more restricted access to data, how does that affect what they do?
Yeah, I mean, there absolutely are artists working in this all over the world. There is, I would assume, there is a politicized element of local flavor, certainly. So artists who are from countries where access to information is not necessarily a given will take a more critical edge on it, maybe than we would.
And then, like Luke showed, you can make up your own data.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you can make up your own data. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a Turkish artist, Barak Erkan, who's one of my favorite data artists, we could call him, and you know, his work is inherently more politicized, I think, than most of the work you see out of North America. I can't off the top of my head. I was sort of scrambling to think of any data artists, if that term is a real term, anyways, in China or certainly in Japan and in South Korea, but. I don't know any Chinese data artists, so that's actually, I'm gonna like put a note to like ask and find some, because I'm sure they're there, but it must be a different experience being a Chinese data artist than.
Yeah.
Jer, on the question of working with corporations, I remember when I was running Technorati, which we had all sorts of social media data, I brought in Golan Levin to visualize our stuff. And the toughest thing was convincing our IT and database administrator guys to take a day out to clean up the data for Golan. So, I mean, you must find that, you know, you're working on this and the CEO wants it, and then there's some guy in the IT department that's like, I have to spend a week for Mr. Thorpe.
Yeah, and you know, that comes back to what I said before, that it's not just about having that sort of art side of it. You have to be technically adept to be able to do this. So I think it comes as a big relief for the IT guys, because they're like, you have to talk to this artist about this project that the VP is sponsoring, and they're like, oh crap, what am I doing? And then if we can sit down with them and we talk their language, we're like, great. Well, we can give it to us however you want, and we can deal with it, which is quite interesting, and another way that we're able to kind of open that door.
Question. Yes, back here.
I run a firm that engineers and implements energy efficiency solutions, and a large part of what we do works around data to create sustained behavioral change and data visualization. And I'm curious if you've had any opportunity to do your work and take it from the art side and translate it into the corporate community, which is not only commissioning art, but the possibility of commissioning art that can create behavioral change, which they're seeking around energy and sustainability.
I've done a little bit of work, not for a corporate client by any means, but for another artist who is looking at environment and sustainability from a very specific political edge. Most of you probably know who she is. Her name's Maya Lin. And what she had me do is create data analogs, experiential analogs to certain types of events that impact animal species, right? So you think about underwater sonar and how it affects whales, right? So she had me make a film where I had a 757 jet turbine land on you in the middle of a cocktail party, right? That's what that would do to you. That's the equivalent, right? You go instantly deaf, your proprioceptive cortex shuts down, and you're basically deaf, dumb, and blind for the rest of your life, right? So, so she had me make these things that were data driven. We're looking at very specific equational references that are polemic, right? And I think there, and so there's a commerce in that, and you can, there are people. I mean, we know people who do that. Yeah.
I mean, I love the question that my challenge has always been like trying to justify. People get excited when they think that they can ask us to do an art piece because they can pay us less than they would pay us if they got us to do consulting, and then they want us basically to do what they would have paid us to do for consulting anyways. It's like we want to hire you as an artist, and can you make a data visualization that'll help us understand our system? And it's like, well, we probably will, but it'll be not in the way that you expect it to happen. So, we're always excited to have these collaborations where that there's an understanding of how that outcome is going to work. There's a reason why we are doing the work that we're doing and not producing corporate data visualizations. And as long as the interest is there from both sides of the table, it's worked for us. But most often, 75% of the time, that it's very hard to convince somebody that there's real value in producing an artwork that's not just something that's going to be pretty in your lobby, but is going to help you understand your data in a different way than the Tuftian kind of understanding of your data.
We are coming to the end of our time. If there's one more burning question, we can take it. Okay, one final question over here. With a microphone arriving at you now.
So if you want to collect art like this, how do you recommend that individuals get started?
It's a great question.
Well, we could talk, of course, after the talk here. But no, seriously, it's a very personal thing. It's just like buying any art. So there's certainly artworks that are at lower budget levels. There are higher budget levels. New media, as I said earlier, which we couldn't get into here, is it's a very wide interpretation. If you're interested in screen-based work or video art, there's a lot of art that you can research, but it's always tough for me to say that. And I wasn't kidding about having a conversation with someone who is involved with this world, because they can guide you. If things like video art are kind of, I guess for some people, easier ways to get into it, because the video there's not so many issues about maintenance. When you get into some of the works we showed you here today, they have computational elements. And once you bring a computer into it, there are some more issues, a little more responsibility on the collector side for maintaining. Because, and I try to be very honest with this, the machines will die. I mean, that computer, when you put it, it's going to look gorgeous, it's going to be up there for 10 years, and then all of a sudden, it's gone. You need to understand what that means and how to go to the next generation of that work. So you need to feel comfortable with that, which today you should feel comfortable with it. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I think it would be a little more difficult. But there's so many people, just programming today. It's a language that the conservators, just like you have a painting conservator, you'll have someone who knows programming to conserve all of this stuff. And again, there was an article in the Times about the Whitney doing a conservation on a piece from 1995, and now it's running beautifully. So, yeah, it's a personal thing, and obviously art fairs. I'm sure if you're an art collector, going to art fairs, although there isn't that much media art at art fairs, there should be more.
And by the way, come down, for anybody interested in this, come downstairs.
Yeah, we
can
walk
shows
into the
we
show
talk about
downstairs.
that. Luke, you have another talk coming up. Tell us when your next talk is.
It's at 3:40?
3:40. So Luke is talking at 3:40.
3:45.
And I think it's downstairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. It's called Sex,
He has
Lies,
a
and Data
whole-
Mining.
yeah.
Okay,
It'll be fun.
guys, thank you very much. There's a history here. I just want to say one final thing. 50 years ago at the Aspen Institute, Walter Petke turned to designers of the day like Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and Herbert Bayer to interpret the great ideas. And these guys today, I think, are helping us do a very similar thing in this era. Thank you very much.